Welcome to Biggest Spoilars, the destination for exclusive spoilers, latest updates.
Pushing Sunny down, Justine slighted him and declared they could no way kiss again. She also met up with Jordan at the hatchet range, and when she vented that she'd done commodity, incredibly stupid and unskillful, Jordan rightly assumed it had to do with Sunny. Explaining how she'd let her guard down and opened up to Sunny after a bad day at work, Justine added that it didn't feel like he'd had an ulterior motive but had simply offered a sympathetic observance. She wondered if that made her foolish, but Jordan proposed that Justine use the fellowship she'd developed with Sunny to get him to lower his guard with her. When Justine professed that she wouldn't vacillate to use any substantiation she had against Sunny to make him, Jordan confided her for knowing where to draw the line. Still, Jordan advised, Justine was still the amusement DA, and as one of the biggest crime heads on the eastern seacoast, Sunny might watch for her only as long as she didn't get in his way. Meanwhile, Sunny disburned on Rick, asking his family if it was a crime to kiss an acting quarter attorney. He went on to explain that he and Justine had been getting to know one another, and while their kiss was collective, she had pushed him down and also slighted him. Rick bothered that Turner would turn this situation around as unwanted attention and charge Sunny of importunity, but Sunny didn't suppose Justine would do that. She was ambitious, but not loose. When Rick asked how important commerce Sunny and Justine had had, and if he'd crossed a line before, Sunny flashed back to the night he rented out the hatchet range for their regale. Rather than answer directly, Sunny replied that he was only telling Rick because he was his counsel. Rick wanted to know if there was actually commodity real between Sunny and Justine, or if it had just been an initiative to throw Justine off and compromise her position. Sunny claimed it wasn't a ploy on his part, but Rick wondered if maybe Justine was using the growing closeness between them to gather substantiation to bring him down. Not so fast. Nathan asked Lulu to meet him at the Brown Dog, and she assumed it was to tell her that he was back together with Maxie. Rather, he told her that Maxie had picked Spinelli, which caught her by surprise because she flashed back how important Nathan and Maxie had loved one another. Nathan said that he understood why Maxie had picked Spinelli, because so important had happened in her life during the times he was gone, and they were no longer the same people. When Lulu wondered what Nathan would have done had Maxie chosen him, he commended that he'd have recognized their marriage. Lulu sounded surprised when Nathan added that if the decision was over to him, he'd have chosen to explore effects with her. Since Maxie was happy with Spinelli, Nathan felt he and Lulu were free to pursue a relationship if they wanted, but she didn't suppose her stylish friend would see it that way. Nathan argued that Maxie would want them to be happy, but Lulu combated that wanting them to be happy and wanting them to be happy together were two different effects. She reiterated to Nathan that she didn't want to do anything that would hurt Maxie, but he declared that exploring what was between them was worth a little awkwardness. Lulu began to reach across the table for his hand but also pulled back, still doubtful. He asked her if she wanted what was between them to be over. "You can't have it both ways." In their bedroom, Brooklyn told Chase she'd always have his reverse but wanted to know if Michael's blameworthiness about cascading Drew's firing on him was correct. Chase claimed he wasn't trying to frame Michael, but finessed Brooklyn's questions about the keys. When she demanded to know what he'd done, Chase disclosed that he hadn't been the one to put the key there but was responsible for the PCPD getting the leave because he knew they'd find a key to the Kane house. Also, he told her how he'd discovered that Michael had a key to Drew's frontal door, but when he claimed it was physical substantiation that Michael had shot Drew, Brooklyn snapped back that Michael wouldn't be stupid enough to frame Willow and keep the key. Chase continued to explain how, knowing that he'd broken the chain of substantiation and anything he set up would be inadmissible, he demanded to have someone additional discover the substantiation, so he suggested to Nathan that the PCPD checked to see if Michael held a key to Drew's house. Furious that her hubby had manipulated his fellow officer, Brooklyn yelled that he'd crossed a line and couldn't understand why he did commodity he knew was wrong, especially since Willow was free and had her kitties back. "The only explanation is that you want vengeance on Michael for what you suppose he did to Willow," she seethed. Chase barked back that Michael couldn't get down with shooting a Solon doubly in the reverse, also framing Willow for it, egging his woman to point out that they didn't know if Michael had actually committed the crime. Concerned that what he'd done might not only bring Chase his career in the long run, but also impact their chance of espousing, Brooklyn demanded he choose between pursuing justice or their desire to have a family. Keep your adversaries close. Having been paged by the sanitarium, Lucas was stopped by Pascal, Sidwell, and Marco on his way out of Windmere. After Lucas changed brickbats with Pascal, Marco walked his swain out, and Lucas was bothered when Marco told him to call first before returning to the house laterally. Meanwhile, Sidwell reprimanded Pascal for putting his hostility toward Lucas on display despite their agreement for him to hold back. When the butler claimed Lucas was a sharp fabricator who would ruin them if his master wasn't careful, Sidwell stated that he'd handle Marco and Lucas and instructed Pascal no way to speak of his enterprises again. As Marco returned to the living room, Sidwell dismissed Pascal. Marco suggested to his father that, in light of Lucas's crazy schedule, maybe they should find a place on the landmass, but Sidwell was adamant that he demanded Marco on Ladle Island to grease their design. When Marco said perhaps that was why he should encourage Lucas to find a place of his own, Sidwell wanted to know if Lucas was complaining about living at Windmere, replying that Lucas had no issues. Marco added that he didn't want to take advantage of his father's hospitality. Either, effects were passing at Windmere that he didn't want Lucas stumbling upon. Sidwell demanded to know if Lucas had seen commodity he shouldn't, but Marco assured his pater that Lucas believed he wasn't involved in the business and had no idea what was really going on at Windmere. At that, Sidwell noted that transferring Lucas down would undermine their relationship and raise dubitation. Because Marco was so happy, Sidwell added, he wanted his son to keep Lucas near. Unknown to Jens and Marco, Pascal was wiretapping on their discussion. Red flag alert. At the WSB field office, Jack informed Jason that he suspected Britt was in peril because WSB Director Cullum was looking into her work at the Five Poppies, and Caesar Faison was a connection between the resort and Anna's breakdown. He instructed Jason to tell Cullum as little as possible about the Five Poppies and not to mention Jocelyn. An angry Jason demanded to know if Joss was in peril, so Jack commended that he'd made a mistake in retaining Carly's son, and while he'd bartered out her record to cover her, he wanted to make sure Jocelyn stayed off Cullum's radar. Their discussion was cut short when Cullum arrived, and he blasted Jack for starting the meeting without him. Handing Jason off to Cullum, Jack left them alone in the office, only for Jason to inform the WSB director that he'd no intention of talking with him. Attempting to conciliate Jason, Cullum said he was simply being treated as a substantiation to the security breach at the Five Poppies. So Jason eventually explained how he'd tracked the apparently dead Britt down there after seeing her in Paris last summer because they'd formerly been involved. Pressing further, Cullum wanted to know what Jason had seen at the resort, or if Britt had told him anything, but Jason claimed that his only concern was Britt's safety. Playing into the ruse that they were no longer together, Jason also told Cullum that he'd brought Britt back to Port Charles and set her up with a place to live, but she had no use for him once she'd been put back on staff at the sanitarium. The odd couple. Latterly, in Britt's office, Cullum praised her for the progress she'd made and said she could do with the factual device formerly Jens had secured the factors. When she baffled that the exploration had all been theoretical and might not actually work, Cullum hovered to find someone who could produce a functional prototype, also left her office. Next, Britt flashed back to Jason's pledge that he'd get her out of the situation when Lucas arrived and revealed that he knew Sidwell and Marco were exacting her. She tried to deny it, but when Lucas stated that he'd verified what he eavesdropped with Marco, Britt declared that Marco was an idiot for bringing Lucas in because of how dangerous the people she was working with were. Soliciting Lucas to forget about their discussion, she advised him to break up with Marco. Lucas informed her that he and Marco had agreed that they had to get out of the situation, but he couldn't do that until he knew that Britt was out as well. After attesting that Marco was apprehensive, Lucas wanted to help her. Britt participated that Marco and Sidwell were supplying her with an experimental medicine in exchange for her doing their bidding. Lucas donated to Search Windmere for the drug. Might Lucas be the key to helping Britt escape from Sidwell's clutches? How do you suppose Lulu will respond to Nathan's question? Will Chase put his career ahead of his desire to be a father? Partake your prognostications about what will be next on GH in the commentary below. In the volatile world of General Hospital, redemption and ruin often arrive in the same breath. What begins as a quiet reckoning inside the Quartermain mansion erupts into fists, fury, and fractured loyalties when Michael Corinthos confronts Harrison Chase once again, and this time, the fight turns brutally physical. But beneath the flying punches and shouted accusations lies something deeper, a baptism of truth, a reckoning that washes away illusion, and a cascade of encouraging words and angry threats that reshape Port Charles in a single explosive night. The emotional tide had already been rising. Wiley's innocent revelation, that he saw Chase near Michael's keys, became the first splash of cold, clarifying water. It wasn't premeditated testimony. It wasn't coached. It was a child speaking what he saw. And in a town drowning in manipulation, that kind of honesty is transformative. Michael felt it immediately. This was the beginning of a cleansing. The narrative painting him as Drew's attacker had cracks now. Real cracks. At the police station, Rick Lansing made it clear that the chain of evidence was compromised. If Chase had handled the keys improperly, if he had inserted himself into the investigation beyond protocol, then the case against Michael was already tainted. Dante acknowledged that Wiley's statement would need corroboration, but the damage was done, not to Michael, but to the prosecution's credibility. The baptism had begun. Yet clarity did not bring calm. It brought fire. Back at the Quartermain mansion, Brooke Lynn and Chase were discussing their adoption hopes when the front door burst open and Michael stormed in like a thunderclap. His restraint, worn thin by weeks of suspicion and whispered judgment, finally snapped. He didn't come to argue politely. He came for answers. "You want me? Come at me," Michael shouted, his voice echoing against marble and memory. "But stop using the PCPD to do it." Brooke Lynn froze. Chase stiffened. The air turned electric. Michael hurled his key ring onto the counter, the metallic clatter slicing through the silence. He accused Chase outright of planting Drew's house key, of manipulating evidence to frame him. Chase's denial came fast and fierce, but it only fueled the inferno. The next moment was pure instinct. Chase lunged. Michael met him head-on. Fists collided. Furniture scraped. Brooke Lynn screamed. It wasn't a calculated fight, it was raw, emotional combustion. Every punch carried weeks of betrayal. Every shove echoed unspoken resentment. Michael's anger wasn't just about the key. It was about trust. About how quickly Chase had believed the worst of him. About how far he'd been willing to go. Dante burst in just in time to drag them apart, but not before damage was done, physically and emotionally. Michael, breath ragged and eyes blazing, delivered the final blow not with his fists, but with his words. "Wiley saw you," he shouted. "You're dirty. You know it, I know it, and now they know it too." That accusation landed heavier than any punch. Brooke Lynn tried to steady the moment, insisting there had to be some misunderstanding. But doubt flickered behind her eyes. Chase, shaken but defiant, stormed out. She followed, torn between loyalty to her husband and the creeping fear that Michael might be telling the truth. Left alone with Dante, Michael's fury shifted into something quieter but no less intense. He swore he had never possessed a key to Drew's house. Dante listened carefully. The detective in him evaluated the facts, the brother in him weighed character. "If Chase really did put that key on your keychain," Dante said slowly, "he just did you a big favor. The evidence is compromised." Michael's voice dropped to something almost vulnerable. "Compromised or not, what do you believe?" Dante didn't hesitate. "I believe you're innocent." Those words became the second wave of baptism. Not just legal relief, emotional validation. After weeks of suspicion, someone in uniform, someone with authority, someone who knew him, said the words out loud. Encouraging words, yes, but also a declaration of restored trust. Across town, life-altering choices were unfolding of a different kind. At the cemetery, Maxie Jones faced her past, and her heart. Standing before Nathan West, resurrected in memory and presence, she relived the agony of losing him. He spoke of the day he was shot, of waking up years later disoriented and robbed of time. Maxie remembered the hospital room where everything went dark. Yet even in that surreal reunion, Maxie made her choice clear. She would always love Nathan. But she was in love with Spinelli. The difference mattered. When she returned home and told Spinelli she chose him, not out of obligation, but out of deep, present love, it was another kind of baptism. A cleansing of doubt. A reaffirmation that love rooted in reality can outlast even the most powerful memory. At the Brown Dog, another storm brewed. Justine Turner confronted Sonny Corinthos with simmering frustration over Michael's ordeal. She was angry, at herself, at the department, at how Willow had slipped through her fingers. Sonny offered empathy, something rare and disarming. But Justine's turmoil remained. Her anger was not just professional, it was personal. She felt responsible for the damage done to Michael. Sonny's quiet support contrasted sharply with the explosive confrontation happening at the Quartermaines. In Port Charles, tension wore many faces. Meanwhile, Rick Lansing opened up to Alexis Davis in a moment of startling vulnerability. He admitted that representing Michael, Sonny's son, symbolized a shift within him. He claimed he no longer hated his brother. That isolation had forced him to confront what truly mattered, family. He wondered aloud if anyone beyond Molly would miss him if he were gone. Alexis, skeptical but attentive, recognized that even flawed men can evolve. In his own way, Rick was undergoing a baptism too, washing away old vendettas in search of something steadier. But the most violent transformation remained the clash between Michael and Chase. For Chase, the fallout is catastrophic. If he tampered with evidence, even with good intentions, his career is hanging by a thread. His demotion already jeopardizes the adoption process with Brooklyn. Now, allegations of misconduct threaten everything. His belief that Michael shot Drew may have blinded him. And as Justine sharply observed earlier, blind spots can destroy even the most principled officers. Angry threats ripple outward. If Chase knowingly manipulated evidence, he could face suspension, internal investigation, or worse. If he didn't, then someone is orchestrating a masterful setup, turning brother against brother. The fight between Michael and Chase is more than physical violence. It is symbolic. It represents the collision between assumption and truth. Between vengeance and justice. Between loyalty and doubt. In the aftermath, the house feels quieter, but not calmer. Brooklyn is forced to confront impossible questions. Chase must decide whether pride or integrity will guide his next move. Dante must investigate without favoritism. And Michael, bruised but resolute, stands at the center of a narrative finally beginning to shift in his favor. The baptism began with a child's honesty. It intensified with a brother's belief. It exploded with fists and fury. And it continues with encouraging words that promise redemption, and angry threats that promise accountability. In Port Charles, nothing stays buried forever. Not planted keys. Not buried grudges. Not misplaced trust. And as the dust settles from this latest explosion, one truth stands firm. Michael is no longer on the defensive.